Hello and welcome to Castle's Corner. I am Coach Castle, and today is going to be a very special day. It's going to be all about understanding the actual nuances with hypertrophy. Hypertrophy being basically how a muscle grows. Now, there's more than one way to do this. It's very misunderstood. There's a lot of new science out about it, and I'm going to be breaking down the science of hypertrophy for you, hopefully in a very simple way. And then I'm actually going to be discussing all of the practical applications to be including in your training regimen, depending whether you want to be stronger or bigger or both. I'm going to be talking about all of the different variations of style of training, be it eccentric overload, be it omni-contraction, rest pause. There's a lot of different variations I'm going to get into. But first, let's actually just go ahead and start getting into like what hypertrophy is. So this is all about basically understanding how to efficiently maximize your muscle growth. Now, maxing out your muscle size requires that you give all facets of muscle hypertrophy your attention. So that means everything from fast twitch and slow twitch myofibril growth to sarcoplasmic expansion, which is what we're going to be talking about. So sarcoplasm is the energy fluid in the muscle that contains ATP and other substrates. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is the increase in the volume of sarcoplasm within the muscle fiber, which increases its size. So the sarcoplasm is basically the fluid and everything else in the muscle that's not in the muscle fiber, that's not myofibrils. So to help you further understand the differences between the actual sarcoplasm and myofibrils, I'd like you to picture one of those long balloons that you see clowns use to make balloon animals, dogs and giraffes and stuff. This balloon is going to represent one single muscle fiber. Now let's just imagine that this long balloon has long, thin tubes that run the length of the entire balloon, kind of inside the circumference of the balloon. These tubes represent the myofibrils. Okay, now finally imagine that the balloon is filled with beet juice instead of air. This beet juice is going to be representing the sarcoplasm. So now we have this long balloon or single muscle fiber that contains all of these tubes, or the myofibrils, and the beet juice, or the sarcoplasm. You got 100 tubes in the balloon, and the rest is filled with a quarter of the beet juice. This will represent an untrained muscle fiber. Now, sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is like adding more beet juice to the balloon, swelling it, and increasing its size. Myofibril hypertrophy is like adding more tubes to the balloon while keeping the same volume of beet juice. Now, this will of course lead to an increased total volume in the balloon. And of course, whether you increase the volume of the juice, the sarcoplasm, or the number of the tubes, the myofibrils, both will be increasing the size of the balloon, or the single muscle fiber size. The critical difference is that adding myofibrils increases the contractile components of the muscle, which increases the strength. Now, due to more contractile units pulling on your bones, of course, this will lead to higher 1-rep maxes and an increase in load lifting ability. Now, adding more sarcoplasm, or the beet juice, increases the workload that the myofibrils are actually able to perform. This means more sets and reps can be performed because in the most basic sense, the myofibrils have more supplies to do their work. Now, depending on the strength training that you are doing and the rep ranges that you lift in, you can influence one more than the other, of course, but they will always coincide. Your muscles will grow strongest and largest when you take turns focusing on both forms of hypertrophy. So, high rep sets and shorter rests between sets increase muscle size by expanding the sarcoplasm. And also, by the way, this is one of the primary reasons that I recommend everyone take creatine, as it replenishes and increases ATP within that fluid, which is a factor in the supplement's ability to increase muscle size through sarcoplasmic expansion. Now, this in turn would, of course, draw more fluid into the fiber to maintain cellular equilibrium. Now, that's a key function of ATP, and it does work, of course, for most trainees unless you have some kind of a deficiency. Creatine, it will also enhance myofibril growth through more efficient muscle contraction. Now, you only need 1 or 2 hard sets to develop those myofibrils. The rest of your sets really should be focused over the higher reps with short rests to develop more capillaries as well as the sarcoplasm. Now, myofibril hypertrophy is primarily caused by mechanical tension. Now, as you guys probably already know, mechanical tension is one of the main stimuli for muscle hypertrophy. For a long time, it was considered the only one. Stretching denervated muscle fibers causes them to grow due to the muscle fiber activation, metabolic accumulation, or calcium ion accumulation, leading to the muscle damage. However, high levels of motor recruitment lead to high levels of muscle activation and can occur without hypertrophy being stimulated. This will occur during fast movements like jumping, running, sprinting, as these actually primarily use your tendons. Only when metabolite accumulation occurs at the same time as high levels of mechanical tension does hypertrophy occur. Now, once again, muscle damage can occur without hypertrophy being stimulated. It is important you understand this because a lot of people will literally be doing these forms of activities expecting muscle growth, which will not occur. Muscle damage occurs after musculature contractions that involve high levels of mechanical tension. Only then will the hypertrophy be occurring, or when high levels of muscle activation occur at the same time as high levels of mechanical tension will hypertrophy also occur. Now, eventually, your body will be adapting to certain levels of intensity. And of course, the beginner and intermediate level styles of training will no longer provide the intensity required to cause adaptation. Now that your muscles have reached a level where they are very comfortable with high intensity and intense muscle contractions, you need to utilize new methods which will allow for extremely intense muscle contractions, while also slowing the buildup of the metabolites on the onset of oxygen to death, which prevent ultra-intense effort. Now, for novice lifters, there is probably absolutely no need to go to failure on any of your sets. So a reps in reserve, or basically you are very close to failure, of 2 to 4 is generally sufficient to stimulate muscle growth. Now, reps in reserve is a method to measure the intensity of a lift, basically how many repetitions you could really reach before technical failure, meaning inability to perform the lift with proper form, shortened range of motion, attempting to use momentum, those things. However, for more experienced lifters, there probably is a benefit to including lots of failure training in a routine. And the need for failure training likely increases as you get closer and closer to your genetic potential, or your genetic ceiling, if you will. Failure training should be employed more sparingly, of course, as you get older in order to facilitate adequate recovery. So it's always, as always, dependent on age and a bunch of other factors. But a good rule of thumb is to limit failure training to the last set of any given exercise, and all other sets you should be employing reps in reserve of 1 to 4. If you are training till failure, it is best to prioritize single joint movements. Even more preferably, you use the biomechanically correct exercises I'm always talking about, as these exercises are less taxing on your nervous system and thus will not impede recovery as much as multi-joint movements. Now, machine-based exercises, provided it's a well-built machine, in addition to being somewhat less taxing from a neuromuscular standpoint, do provide a degree of safety when training to failure if you don't have a spotter. Now, let's talk about biomechanical training, what I teach, or traditional training. Which one's going to give you the best results? Well, this is actually pretty easy to explain. When a muscle region has the best leverage for movement, it contributes the most to that movement. This is according to the principle of neuromechanical matching. This is affected by the exercise plane of movement, the joint used, as well as the strength curve. Now, different intersegmental interactions can also affect the relative activation of all the muscles involved in each exercise. as well as the amount of motor unit recruitment level achievable. So basically, how you select your exercise and how you perform it depends on how much muscle you're going to grow. Now, this is because exercises that involve less muscle mass are more stable and are less complex, and they all permit higher levels of motor unit recruitment to be attained, since they involve lower levels of perceived effort for the same level of central motor command. Now, working inside of the optimum resistance curve will greatly affect the mechanical tension that your muscle fibers experience. Passive tension is increased when the exercise strength curve permits peak forces to be exerted at longer muscle lengths, and intersegmental interactions, which might also affect the mechanical tension produced by the muscle fibers, will be reduced muscle fiber shortening velocities. Now, a biomechanically perfect arm day would be one set of each perfect exercise for each muscle group, moving on to the next exercise. Each movement would be perfectly safe, maximally effective for each muscle group. You would then repeat the procedure, and each muscle group would have between 10 and 14 minutes to fully recover from their previous set. And with each set lasting between only 1 or 2 minutes, this would give you a total work time, if you're doing 3 to 4 sets, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes in the gym. Now, this would be with no breaks, or reason to stop for that matter, or be distracted, just focused on your fast-paced workouts, maximally efficient, with more time to recover in between your actual sets of the exercise, and much more efficient, healthy, and rapid results. You also won't be sore after your workouts. Now, if you compare this to traditional training, which takes significantly longer to perform, at least 90 minutes to 2 hours or more. Now, this is due to at least a 1 to 2 minute rest between sets, not including the time of the set itself. And also, compound movements which are not effective, they're not safe, and they take time to set up, and they take time to break down, and they use a ton of weight plates, badly built machines, etc. These will all be overtaxing your central nervous system, slowing down your recovery considerably. So I could keep going, but long story short, using traditional style of training, it will take many more hours in the week to go to the gym, many years longer to get to your goal. You will be breaking your body permanently in the process. You will be creating many musculature and posture imbalances. You'll be stripping cartilage, damaging tendons, and at the end of the day, be considerably worse for the wear, instead of being healthy and fit in a much faster and more efficient way. Now, since we got that out of the way, now let's talk about the actual training styles. So eccentric training and eccentric exercises to be increasing your strength and hypertrophy. Now, one of the most misunderstood and misapplied training concepts is the eccentric overload. Most people think that the eccentric overload is simply slowing down the eccentric muscle lengthening component of a lift. But that is not the whole story. That is just slowing the weight down via the negative and emphasizing the eccentric repetition for 3 to 5 seconds. And in this case, depending on the weight, you might not be receiving the benefit of total muscle fiber recruitment or actually overloading the muscle. The reason people think that it does is because the weight is lowered slowly, because you are voluntarily reducing the contractile force of the muscle to the point where it becomes lower in the counter force of the load. Basically meaning lowering the weight for 3 to 5 seconds does not produce more force versus concentric portions, Whereas eccentric overload or maximum eccentric contraction does require a max effort contraction, overloading it. During max eccentric contractions, the counterforce of the load should exceed the shortening force produced by the maximum effort of the muscle contraction. Basically, the amount of weight that you lower should far exceed that which you can do when you shorten the muscle or contract the muscle. Therefore, the muscle experiences very high tension and very high mechanical stress to facilitate further adaptations for strength and hypertrophy. Now, there are other ways, of course, to be stimulating your hypertrophy. So that, of course, is explaining the eccentric overload. Basically, you need a weight that is something like 30 or even up to 50% more than you can actually lift or contract with your muscle, And that is the weight that you should be selecting if your goal is the eccentric overload portion of the movement. But of course, you can also just alter rep speed, or basically the tempo of your movement. So while most standard rep speed is 1 second to lift and 3 to 4 seconds to lower for the eccentric overload, there are many different variations of tempo training which can be employed, and each one has its own benefits. So for example, a speed rep is about 1.5 seconds for the entire rep. Now, this does not mean throwing the weight around. You remain in control. It's just a rapid rep. Because remember, as I always say, momentum is for morons, guys. Do not use momentum. We're training biomechanically and intelligently. This is simply a faster tempo on both the positive and the negative, but it is still performed under strict control. That faster cadence has the potential to involve different muscle fibers and or affect the previously worked muscle fibers with unique stress. Now, at the other end of the rep tempo spectrum, the longer side, is lowering it for 6 to 10 seconds and raising or contracting it in only 1 second. So if you take the ideal exercise, and instead of the standard 20 reps on a set of 1, you'd be doing 8 to 10 reps. However, you'd be lifting it for 1 second and lowering it for 6 to 10 reps. You would still get the long tension time, more than a minute, but you would also get the uniqueness of the slow negative on every rep. Again, you should be choosing your weight carefully with this though. And then of course, you have a moderate speed rep. That would be like a 1.5 second raising and a 1.5 second lowering without the momentum. A slow motion rep, this time is the 1 second raising, and this would be even an 8 to 12 second eccentric or lowering of the load. I would recommend a partner for this one, of course. Then you have stretch pause, which is you lower for the count of 3 seconds, then hold the stretch position for 1 second, then rapidly raise the concentric portion of the rep. Doing this for your calves is a great example. Then you have the stretch pump partial reps. At the end of the set, you move into the stretch position and perform 2 to 5, maybe even up to 10 partial repetitions only in the first third of the movement range. And then you have the partial stretch overload. So you use a stretch partial pump in the stretch position between every full rep. So basically, what I just said about the stretch in the first third of the movement, except you do the full movement, and then you go ahead and do a partial, and then the full movement, and you keep doing that. That would be the partial stretch overload. Then we have just the basic stretch overload. This would be just emphasizing the stretch portion of any exercise, basically just putting a little bit more load at that portion. Having a partner or using a machine is a very easy way to do this. The stretch, it's very important due to the mechanical disadvantage. That's the portion of the rep where the muscle is strongest and also produces the most force. Now, the first third portion of the movement is the stroke where the target muscle is elongated most and the deciding factor in the actual muscle fiber recruitment. So basically, how many fibers you're using will be decided with the starting of the lift of the weight. Your body's like, okay, we need this many, essentially. Then there's other styles of training. Now, these styles of training were basically popularized by Mike Mentzer. However, they're very effective, and if you adjust them just a little bit, you really should be incorporating these into your training just about every time you train if you're a more intermediate or advanced lifter. So you guys have heard me talk about these before, but I'm just going to get into them again briefly. The first one would be rest pause training. So to properly perform rest pause training, you must first warm up the targeted muscles thoroughly with a set of lightweight repetitions. So think sarcoplasm training. Then select a weight for the first repetition of the rest pause set. Now, the weight needs to be one that you are able to perform a maximum single attempt with proper form. So just one time you can do it. If you tried to do it a second time, you couldn't do it. This, of course, ensures maximum intensity and that the proper effort is generated on every single rep. After performing the first all-out rep, put the weight down, rest for a minimum, something like 8 to 15 seconds to allow the oxygen depth in your body to correct itself and allow the waste products to exit the muscle. This will allow for the second repetition to be another all-out maximum intensity rep. Now, to be performing this style of training, you will not necessarily need a training partner, but it's extremely helpful, as you might not quite be able to do the second rep without their assistance, and you don't want to be jerking your body around. So be sure that your partner's assistance is only enough to complete the second rep. After your second rep, put the load down, and again, rest for 8 to 15 seconds, and now you're going to be decreasing the weight by 10 to 20% depending. This should allow you to complete another deliberate and focused repetition, hopefully without your partner's assistance. Then repeat the previous steps with your partner's assistance for the fourth rep. Once again, rest, etc., 15 to 20 seconds, as you will now be very fatigued. Attempt to do another rep with or without your partner's assistance, depending whether or not you lowered the weight and also depending whether or not you have a partner. If you have a partner, you're going to be repeating the previous steps with your partner, and again for your final rep. So again, not many reps here. We're shooting for 5, maybe 7 reps at the very most. This style of training is very demanding and is also incredibly intense, and you really will not be able to compare it to anything unless you actually do it yourself with somebody who understands how to properly perform rest pause training. I have videos on this, check them out, but only if you do it yourself will you be able to fully appreciate how difficult it actually is, as well as the level of focus, commitment, and dedication required to finish the set. It is critical that you understand that with rest pause training, each and every single rep of the set is an all-out maximum effort. And I would stress that for most people, one single set of rest pause training is sufficient per training session. This is provided, it is preceded by 1 or 2 warm-up sets with moderate intensity, of course. Now, remember that once you induce muscular growth stimulation through hard training, you must allow that growth to take place. Meaning, as most of you already know, but you like to forget, when you are in the gym, you're breaking your muscle fibers, you're not growing them. And the growth occurs in the recovery time following your workout leading up to the next. And if you are training with high intensity and not giving yourself enough time between workouts to recover, how could you ever expect to grow? You're going to be going backwards. Remember, you've got to recover back to your baseline first. Then the muscle supercompensates, grows stronger. Then you should go back and hit the muscle again. That's correct muscle growth. Now, another variation, basically a variation of rest pause training, however, adding another component of extra eccentric overload, is infotonic training. Infotonic training and omnicontraction training are both very similar to rest pause training, in that each rep is a maximum effort, but with the added difference that the negative aspect of each rep is also a maximum effort. However, to be performed safely and effectively, you will absolutely need an experienced training partner to help you with this one, as they must understand basically how to do it safely. If you're able, you can assist yourself with your opposing limb or with the mechanical counterforce, as these will be needed to assist in the eccentric portion of the lift. However, just really make sure you know what you're doing, or, just call me and I'll walk you through it or something. It's not that easy to do. You really have to have a thorough understanding of your body, bones, all these things. But anyways, you'll be performing your regular rest pause training for maximum repetitions, but now what you're going to do is lower the weight very slowly with a little bit of additional force. This is where your partner comes in. This downward force will be provided very carefully so that you do not injure the working muscle. The downward force is also going to be subjective to the weight you're lifting, of course, so it's just not going to be much more. Be very careful that your partner doesn't give you so much downward pressure that you lose control and you hurt yourself. So basically, you'll be doing a bicep curl, you get it up to the top, you start lowering it, your partner puts his hand on top of the actual weight and pushes down a little bit more. Your job is to keep perfect form, don't move your upper arm, leave it right alone, and just deal with the additional load that your partner is placing, hopefully consistent pressure throughout the movement. And then, of course, as I previously just mentioned, there's also the omnicontraction training. Now, the key to generating more and more effort, of course, is to make each musculature contraction as severe and intense as possible. Skeletal muscles each have 3 separate levels of strength. The the positive or the raising of the weight, contracting, the static or the holding of the weight, the isometric, and the negative or the lowering of the weight, or the eccentric. Each of these refers to a different type of contraction, as you guys know, and of course, each one of these has its own benefits, let's say. And if you train all three, it's kind of the ultimate intensity method. Now, basically, for each and every one of these types of contractions, you're looking for a full focused effort for each portion of it. Hence comes the name of the method, omnicontraction training, or basically all contractions are present training. So after a proper warm-up, once again, choose a weight that allows for a maximum single rep, as in rest pause training or in photonic training. It's the same thing, you're overloading the muscle. However, this time, as you lower the weight in the negative aspect, stop the downward progression at 3 separate points in the range of motion. One close to the top, one quite towards the midpoint, and then another near the bottom, but not quite fully extended. So if you're doing a bicep curl, it would be raise it up, lower it, pause, lower it, pause, lower it, pause. You're going to hold the weight in each one of these 3 different positions and attempt to reverse the downward motion, as in you're going to attempt to lift the weight again. Now, if you selected the correct weight, it should be impossible. You should not be able to lift the weight at all. Hold each position for 2 to 3 seconds at the very most and perform just like the rest pause. So after each finished repetition, wait 10 to 15 seconds before your next. Now, of course, conversely, you could select 3 different positions each and every time for 3 different static hold positions so that you work many more points in the entire range of motion statically. And of course, as I already said, follow the same basic guidelines as rest pause and in photonic training. It is very helpful to have a partner assist you with these, provided they know what they're doing. And of course, guys, you might get really innovative here and combine all of these sets, reps, styles, tempos. The sky's the limit. I don't know why you couldn't. Now, performing, of course, biomechanically correct exercises, you're only going to be needing to do 23 to 26 different exercises, depending on how you're splitting that up throughout the week. That's up to you, of course. But anybody who says performing the same exercises every week is boring, they just don't know how to alter their training. I have been performing the perfect biomechanical exercises for at least 4 years now, and about 4 years before that, I was doing my best to employ the perfect biomechanically exercises. I've never gotten bored because I vary my times, my tempos, my intensity. A lot of this hypertrophy research has only come out within the last year or two, so I've been incorporating a lot of this new knowledge into my training. Even if you look at my past YouTube videos, you'll see that I was misspeaking I was not misspeaking, but I was giving you guys the best information I had at the time 2 years ago, which has since been updated, and I've updated my training accordingly. Because as I always say, facts do not care about your feelings, and there really is just a couple best ways to train. And if you're training smart, you're training using biomechanics, and if you're training smart, you're using proper rules of hypertrophy, rest, and recovery. So guys, I hope this video was helpful, and of course, if you have any questions about it, just reach out to me, any of my social media accounts, Coach Castle Instagram, Castle Thompson on Facebook. My email, of course, is castleinprogress@gmail.com. Reach out to me there. You can message me. You guys all know how to reach me. And of course, always remember, everybody, I have Sunday Live. It's at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Goes till 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's just my way to freely coach you guys. Any questions you have, pop on YouTube Live. You can see me there, and I'll answer your questions if you put it in the questions. Other than that, guys, please just remember, I spent a lot of time learning and researching all of this stuff. I make these videos to help you guys out. All I ask in return is you give me a thumbs up, you leave some kind of a comment. I don't care what it is. A smiley face or thank you for the algorithm is also acceptable, considering that's what it's for. And of course, remember to subscribe if you like my videos. I'm always here to coach you guys. If you can ever use a coach, please hit me up. I'm very happy. Most people only get coaching from me for 1 to 3 months, and that's because I prioritize your education above all else. So that's it for me, guys. Have a great day, and I hope this video was very helpful.
Your will lies deep way under the surface, and like a fire needs coal in the furnace.
let's go.
Thoughts can keep you down, pushing deep until you drown, or they can keep you up strong, focused on the now. Glass half full, or has it been emptied out? Well, that's all up to you and your mind. Do you doubt anything, everything, not a thing? Make my thoughts work for me, manifest what I need, what I want, what I see. I could be anything, I attract all the things that I see. I believe I'll achieve as I breathe in and out again and again. I don't doubt, I sit and I plan, and I found out that I can execute if I'm driven, if I listen, if I learn all the wisdom. Read some books, something written, watch the best teacher system I invest. Never hidden, I ain't scared, ain't no chicken, I take dares. I'll be winning, you get back what you're giving. Find the reason that you're living, what you're good at, all your gifts and what you love. Take a risk and find out what you've been missing, yeah. The will lies deep way under the surface, and like a fire needs coal in the furnace. This is your goal that makes it all worth it. This is your why that gives you your purpose.